ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Well, Peter Dutton's plan to roll out nuclear power plants across the country has certainly sparked plenty of debate in Parliament this week, particularly the suggestion that it will lead nuclear to cheaper energy bills. The government says that claim is rubbish. It says nuclear power is the most expensive form of energy there is, the last thing Australia needs. The back and forth in Parliament this week has certainly fed into the broader cost of living debate that's been going on for quite a while. So who's right on this? Who's wrong? And who can we trust? Well, the most comprehensive, independent look at Australia's energy options is conducted each year by the CSIRO, together with the Australian Energy Market Operator. And in its annual Gen Cost report, it's found renewables are still by far the cheapest option. And as a result of that finding, the CSIRO has found itself perhaps somewhat uncomfortably in the political firing line. So where does this leave the agency, and are politicians actually listening to the science? I'm David Spears on Ngunnawal Country at Parliament House in Canberra. Welcome to Insiders on Background. And I'm pleased to say I'm joined this week by the relatively new boss of the CSIRO, Doug Hilton. Good to talk to you.
Likewise, David.
I say relatively, it's 9 months or so in the role. How's it going?
It's been absolutely wonderful. I think it's the best job in the country. Get to talk to remarkably passionate staff doing great science. So what could be better?
That sounds all right. Let's go to this debate, though, that's certainly taken a fair bit of attention, or put a fair bit of attention on the CSIRO over your Gen Cost report and what it's found on the cost of nuclear. Just remind us, what did the report find?
So the report looks at the levelised cost of energy. So it allows us to compare the cost of production using different means, which is exactly what Australia needs in terms of information if we're trying to navigate to net zero in 2050, which is a challenge everybody's aware of. And what it found was that firmed renewables were the cheapest in terms of being able to generate power.
And firmed renewables, to explain, means not just the wind or the solar, but the storage, batteries and pumped hydros and things that are needed to go along with it.
Absolutely. So, it doesn't really matter how much wind and solar you have. If the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing, you need something that enables you to get through that period, and that's what firming is.
And it also included the cost of all the transmission lines as well.
Yeah, it included the integration costs. So that was something that was asked as part of the way we iterate the reports over the last 6 years. So again, it shows that we're responding to input from the community and improving the quality and the breadth of what we do.
Of this report each year. So you also looked at both large and small scale nuclear this year as well. And just tell us what you found about those.
So large nuclear, which is a technology we've obviously not had here, is 1.5 to 2.5 times more expensive than firmed renewables. And small modular reactors that really haven't been built commercially anywhere, although we're now starting to get estimates of what the cost of production would be, are around 6 times the cost of firmed renewables.
6 times the cost of firmed renewables. Presumably we'll get a bit more clarity on small modular reactor costs, though, if they are further developed. Is it possible that cost could come down?
That's right. So what we find with technologies is when you're first building things, when they're first being manufactured, they're more expensive. Think about computers. For the amount of power you get from a computer back in the 80s, they are far more expensive than they are now. So there's a relatively predictable curve of technology costs over time. So, if in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, small modular reactors are being used routinely around the world, we would expect the technology costs to come down. And of course, Gen Cost would reflect that, as they do.
But you can only work with what the data shows at the moment.
Indeed.
Now, a couple of issues have been raised about the report. One, let's just go through a couple of them. One goes to the lifespan of a nuclear plant. I think your model suggested it would have a 30-year lifespan. The coalition says, they do run 80 to 100 years, and of course, if you run them, 2-3 times as long, they're going to be cheaper over time. Why did you model only a 30-year lifespan?
So there's 2 really different types of lifespan that we need to think about. One's the economic span. That's the time you need to pay the people back who lend you the money to build the plant or buy your car or purchase your house.
But if it's a government-owned, You don't need to pay anyone back.
And then the second one is the taxpayer does, right? And we don't take into account subsidies in the way we do the levelised cost. So we use, which is economic lifespan, which is the norm in this type of economic modelling. It's not contentious. And what we do is use the same assumptions across each of the energy types that we're modelling. So it's, again, a level playing field that allows us to be able to compare the cost in a meaningful way.
But do you accept, though, nuclear plants do often run 80 years, that if you used an 80-year figure, and if it was government-owned, they can carry that, you would get a cheaper price?
Look, that would be something we would need to model. It's not quite as simple as that. And what we've done, obviously, is provide the underlying model to the public, including our elected representatives.
So would you be willing to look at an 80-year model?
We're willing to provide the system that allows other people to model using their figures.
Right. Now, just on that, it raises the question, why does the CSIRO do this work? This is a bigger question, I suppose. It does sound a lot like accounting, modelling, more than scientific research.
It's an interface between really complicated technologies and future predictions, and that's something CSIRO's done in different areas over a long period of time, and we collaborate with the right people to do it. So it's not just CSIRO off doing it alone. We collaborate on this with AEMO, the market operator, but also, companies like Orican that have, a really good track record of building complicated kind of capital plants. So, we think it's an important element of what CSIRO does. It complements what we do in terms of our research.
The other issue the Coalition raised with your numbers was the utilisation rate, how much you use a nuclear plant. You suggested the nuclear plants would run at, I think it was 53% capacity. The Coalition says, well, they run at more than 90% in a lot of parts of the world, and that would make them a lot more cost-effective as well.
Yeah, so again, it's a really important point. So what we do is provide a range, and the range we provided in the report was 53 to 89. So 89 is pretty close to 90%.
Did it come out cheaper if you used that 89% figure?
Right, so it obviously is cheaper the more you use it, but the challenge is that most plants that are creating baseload power operate at around 60%. And it's different in different markets. So the way Australia utilises energy, there are periods where you don't need a lot, during the night, on cooler days. So we need to model the utilisation rate for the Australian economy and Australian society, and that's very different from high-density populations in the Northern Hemisphere. So, again, what we do is we don't assume that what's working in Mongolia or Korea or Japan or Germany is going to be exactly what happens here. We do the modelling that is fit for purpose for Australia, and you come out with good objective estimates of how much time those plants are going to be operating. And we have great experience doing that with coal, which has the same type of capability in terms of generating power as nuclear does, but obviously without the problems of greenhouse gases.
So just to be clear on that, even if you ran a nuclear plant at 89% capacity under your modelling, it's still going to be a lot more expensive than renewables.
Absolutely. Okay. So that's the key, and what we find is that there are actually very few coal-fired plants that run at 89%.
And I guess increasingly so as more renewables enter the market.
Yeah, more renewables enter the market, that's true, and different ways of firming, but also those plants that do operate at that higher percentage time are the ones that are the absolute cheapest. And they're at the moment coal, and they can bid into the market at times when only cheap power is going to be used. So we think the kind of the 60% mark, which is the kind of average, is a pretty good indication of utilisation rates.
There was another complaint from Peter Dutton about your report. He called it discredited. He said because of the figures you'd put in there on renewables, he said the report, quote, doesn't take into account some of the transmission costs, the costs around subsidies for the renewables. What do you say to that?
Well, we haven't taken into account any subsidies, so I think that's really important. What we do is a fair, objective comparison using the same assumptions across all of the different technologies that we use to generate electricity. So, I think that even-handed approach is absolutely fair, and I did take exception with the the notion that the report was discredited and CSIRO was unreliable. I don't think that's very helpful.
Yeah, so what impact does that have when a political leader is suggesting a CSIRO report is discredited?
Look, I think it corrodes public trust in science. And, at this moment in time, we need public trust in all the different pillars of civil society. I think that's something that I've really appreciated in Australia growing up through the years, that we do have a community that trusts things like our electoral commission, our judiciary and our scientific organisations. I think as a community, if we're going to navigate the really profound challenges that confront us, whether that is around AI and misinformation or pandemics or the transition of our electricity system, we need a community that is able to rely on good, objective scientific evidence. And I think understanding why scientific method gives you that data and that firm foundation is really important.
And that corroding of trust, he also said this was a skewed report from the CSIRO. Do you suspect that's a deliberate move?
I don't know. I think that's a question for the leader of the opposition. I think for CSIRO, what we do is we play a dead straight bat. We have no skin in the game here in terms of which technologies are going to be used. That is absolutely the remit of our policymakers. And, I like the fact that we're having a debate about policy. And I think if we keep our debate around policy, that's a great thing.
Are you happy to sit down and talk to Peter Dutton or Ted O'Brien and go through the report and explain why it's not skewed?
I'm absolutely passionate about bringing science to every one of our elected representatives.
Have you spoken to them?
I've spoken to Ted O'Brien, the Shadow Minister, and it was a really respectful and useful conversation. So I welcome any opportunity to talk to our elected representatives, whether they're independent or where they sit in terms of their party across the political spectrum.
Did he convince you that there was anything wrong with the report?
No, he didn't convince me that the report was flawed, but we had a conversation around those two really important issues, the difference between an economic lifespan and a technical lifespan, and the percent of time a plant like a large nuclear plant might be utilised.
But did you say to him, even if you ran the lifespan out to 80 or 100 years, and even if you ran it at 90% capacity, still going to be more expensive?
I didn't say that to him.
But that's the reality. That's what you're
No, look,
saying.
I think we have not done that specific modelling.
But will you?
No, what we'll do is the modelling that makes sense to compare the different technologies in an objective way, so to give that levelised cost. But what we also do is provide the model and the tools that enable anybody to model whatever figures they like. So I think that's really important. We're transparent around the assumptions we make. The report is, it's a medium-sized volume. The majority of that report is around the assumptions we're making in a very transparent way, the questions that we've been asked, our responses to feedback, and then providing the data that allows others to take our model and plug their own data in.
Look, when you talk about the need to trust the science and how we rely on the CSIRO,